Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me at the Botanical Society's webinar for August. I'm happy to be co-hosting with Rupert for the next 2 months. Definitely bringing more of the gardening, horticulture side into it. And he, of course, brings this wonderful conservation side to it. And in order to celebrate spring, I have 2 presenters that I have invited to talk about their areas of passion. And our first presenter this evening is Eugene Marinas from Huntham Botanical Garden. Although he was the curator there for over 15 years, he's moved on just like I have to grow and to enjoy and to know flowers in his own area of expertise. And today his title is Between the Daisies. We're always looking at the daisies, but Eugene is going to unfurl what he finds between them and share his passion and his knowledge with us. So Eugene, welcome everybody. Enjoy. Here we go, Eugene Marinas, superstar of the West Coast.
Hi, thanks, Elise, and welcome everybody. I'm going to speak about the blooming secrets between the daisies, and specifically, people usually want to see rolling hills of carpets and carpets of daisies, and that is what people are used to when they hear West Coast on Immaculate. And today I'm going to take you in between the daisies, but I'm not going to tell you where to go, the best places to visit, where the flowers are peaking at the moment, although I'll say a bit of the inside info. But just for the purposes of when you go flower hunting, some very, very good tips or advice is to phone or visit the local info offices. Locals knows best. Book a local guide or book a tour. Most people go into the West Coast or the Macquarie during flower season. They go in with this misconception that they will just see carpets and carpets of daisies. This year in particular is a very, very special year. There were lots of early rains and lots of follow-up. And over the West Coast and parts of the Macquarie, it might be raining at the moment. And that also means that the flower season will be prolonged. So what people usually want to see, this photograph, what courtesy of the Macquarie Tours, was taken on the 29th of August, just 2 days ago. And most people want to see that. They want to see carpets and carpets of daisies, similarly to the second photograph. And if you go a bit further north, up to Nevilleville, where my actual expertise lies, you can, in some areas, the diversity is so high that you can get 15 to 20 different plant species in 1 square meter. So my tip to you would be, get out of your car, go and walk. Go and see those exceptional species in between. But I know people want to see mass display of daisies or whatever, but mass display. So if you go to Nevilleville, this picture was taken about a week ago. That was of a very special Bulbinella, the orange Bulbinella, and there's a combination of orange and yellow and orange Bulbinellas. This photograph was taken at the Botanical Gardens. You can only visit that area if you go on a special tour at the Botanical Gardens. And then the next photograph is with courtesy of Mandy Kotze. This was taken yesterday. At the moment, Nevilleville is reaching its peak because Nevilleville is also known as the bulb capital of the world. So when all the daisies and everything on the West Coast and that are sort of dimming down, then Nevilleville goes into a peak with their bulbous species. So then if you also visit the area, look for the individual brilliance like this Esperantha virginata. And some people usually miss them if they're not in mass display, because they're not in mass display every year. Sometimes you actually need to look for them. And also this Spiralia from the West Coast. If you don't look carefully, you will miss these spectacular species. And then also One of my favorites is the Scrophulariaceae, like this Alanzoa. I will tell you a bit more about this specific species further in my slide, but it looks like a very, very funny face, and it is very, very intriguing, and it's got a very special pollinator that pollinates it. Then there's also species that display different colors over the range of their distribution. Particularly this one, Spiraxis elegans. It's a widely cultivated species, but it's actually endemic from the Liverpool area, and it distributes through the town of Liverpool, north to south. And if you go further north, you get a sort of a deep orange color without any markings on it. And if you go further south, it can change, and you can see in the photographs that it becomes a bit lighter, and then the markings inside is also more prominent. And if you go further south, you can even get a white form of it. And there's a photograph of a white and the mauve one next to each other. So there's a lot of variation. And if you think you've seen it all, you need to go in between the bushes, in between the daisies, and check um, what you've missed there. Because I've had tour groups coming into the botanical gardens in a bus. They sit in the bus, they just go click, 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 turn around the bus, check the parking, and out they go. And they think they've seen it all. So over the years, I've actually become a bit sort of fascinated by all the pollinators, and I've looked at the different pollinators on the different flowers, and I've come to the conclusion that you actually need the right tool for the right job, because all those plants, everything that comes out of mass needs to be pollinated. They have one mission, and that's to be pollinated to ensure that they've got a seed bank under the ground. So in the years that there's not enough rain, that they can lie in the dormant in the seed bank and come out when conditions are right. So I'm actually very fascinated by um, pollinators, and I've started photographing pollinators. They're not as easy as plants because they don't sit still, they move around, and if you have to be at the right place at the right moment. So um, there's some of my photographs that I've taken over the years, and it's really just so fascinating. If you can just stop for a moment, observe the plants, look at what pollinates them, because that's also very, very important. Because without a pollinator, there won't be any flowers. So some of them, as this butterfly here, you can see the tongue in front. If it didn't have the right tool, it wouldn't be able to suck out the nectar from the bottom of this oxalis. And then also this very, very special fly. If you look at the length of the tongue of that fly, but it's also the same length as the tube of the flower. So they have sort of co-evolved. But I'll also explain a bit more about the fly further in my presentation. So, so some of the plants also they flat on the ground, and they also need a very specialized pollinator. Unfortunately, I don't have a photograph of this particular pollinator on the plant, but this is actually pollinated by mice. They flat on the ground, and they've got a very sugary sort of reward for the mice. And this is a Masonia, flat on the ground. It's one of the early flowers, but very, very specialized. And then there's also this Dobenia. They just about past their peak, and they're also pollinated by mice, and they're very specific. There are some other opportunistic pollinators that will visit them, but they're very specialized in who they want them to pollinate them. And then also there's Colchicum, another one that's pollinated by mice, flat on the ground, and this one's got a very, very bright color also. And then just some advertising. Some of the people visit the area, and they they think, okay, what else is there to do apart from looking at the flowers? So the West Coast and Immaculate is very, very rich in culture. And there's also a few other things that you can check out on the different websites or phone the number below, um, like the mountain bike and um, trail run. And there's also a picnic at Clover on the Sunday coming. And then currently, the Klein William Wildflower Show is running daily from 8:30 to 6:30. So please make a note of it to visit there. That's been a highlight over the years that I visited and really worthwhile visiting. And then there's also the Darling Wildflower Show that will start on the 15th and end on the 17th of September from 9 to 2 daily. And a special save the date for the West Coast branch outing to the Darling Flower Show on the 17th. They will be meeting at the museum at the entrance at 10 a.m. and it's sponsored for members to enter. And then coming back to this little Allozoa, this is one of the species that really fascinating. If you look closely at the flower, the bottom part of the flower is like a cylinder, and the pollen presenters is actually at the bottom. So the area around Beaverville or the rest of the Maculand is a very hot spot for a lot of plant species, but it's also a hot spot for bee diversity, and specifically solitary bee diversity. So this particular one is pollinated by a solitary bee called Rediviva ellenzoii. It's so specific to the species. It's that it's actually named after the species. So what happens here is that the bee actually comes, sit on the flower, and the abdomen fits in perfectly at the bottom to get to the pollen presenters. And the pollen actually goes on the abdomen, and that is how it's transferred and moves on to the next flower. And then there's a whole lot of dioecious with different spur lengths, like this one, Diacia louisii. This one you usually only see when you have early winter rain, and it's only known from a few populations scattered around Beaverville. And these slides are specifically to show you the spur lengths. The louisii don't have a spur at all. And then the Veronicoides have a sort of a medium-sized spur. And yeah, if you're lucky, sometimes you take a photograph and later at night you see, it resembles a little face or something. Yeah, but then you also get the other dioecious like Diacia floribunda. This one's got a slightly longer spur, and the reason for that is because these species have co-evolved with the Rediviva bees. And in the photographs, you'll see the front legs is from small to medium to very long. So these pollinators and plant species have actually co-evolved over the years. And all these photographs and information that I'm sharing is courtesy of Dr. Michael Kuhlman, that I know very well, and he's been doing research for the last 25 years in the Nanaimo region. So the sort of the coevolution is taken a bit further because the Diacia floribunda is one of the species that actually produces oil. So the bee comes and actually takes its front legs, put it into the spurs where the fine hairs on the front legs ruptures the oil glands and sucks it up. And when it takes up the front legs, it rubs it on the thorax and transfer the oil and then visit the next plant. So the bee actually collects oil and then it uses some of the oil to waterproof the nest, because now their life cycle is similar to that of the flowers in the area. That means that these bees will only re-emerge next season. So what the bee does, it uses some of the oil to waterproof the nest. So the hind legs are adapted as little sort of brushes. So it lines the whole nest with oil to waterproof it, because the next generation will only emerge after the next rainy season. And then some of the oil is also used to make little pollen balls to preserve as food for the next generation before they emerge. And then there's also very, very specialized uh, pollinators, like this little fly here. And as you can see, they have co-evolved over the years so that the fly and the different species that it pollinates actually can coexist. This fly is called Suca marinaceae, and it actually pollinates about 5 different species in the Liverpool area, and it's also endemic to the area with the long stems. So in the picture, we have Leperousia oreogena, and the picture on the far right, you can see that the plant actually have little arrows pointing inward, showing the fly here. Because you can imagine, if the fly needs to maneuver itself to actually find that little hole to suck out from the bottom of the tube, it needs to be very accurate. So the picture on the left, it actually took me about an hour to take that photograph, and they're very, very difficult to photograph. It's easier to make a video of them. So you will also notice that there's pollen on the front head of the fly. So the different species that this fly pollinates have the pollen presenters on different parts of the plant. So that also helps to exclude cross-pollination with different species. And yeah, the fly is very fast, and also it emerges and it's synchronized with the different times that the different species flower that it pollinates. So a few years ago, I was honored by the person that described the fly, and it was named after me. And it's mainly because I had a sort of obsession with the fly. I've photographed it on every one of the species that it pollinates, and I've also done quite a bit of research contribution towards the description of the fly. So just a final note on the Weskus branch outing to Darling on the 17th of September at 10 a.m. Thank you.
Eugene, thank you so much. There are a few questions for you. Do you mind responding? If you don't mind leaving your camera on.
Okay.
So the first question.
Yes.
You ready? Your first question is, how does one book a tour with you to go into the field to see the pollinators?
Yeah, all my details are on the first slide and on the last slide, and people can feel free to contact me. It's best to put me on WhatsApp or just drop me an email.
Okay, fantastic. I even want to see it. So my question is, you said you waited an hour for that one pollinator, but what is the longest you've ever sat crouching, ready to capture them and got it or given up? What is the longest you've sat there waiting?
About 2.5 hours. And that's the actual one on my first slide on the Babiana, the fly in the Babiana. That took me about 2.5 hours.
And despite your really weird obsession with flies, let's just say that your pictures are absolutely beautiful. What kind of camera do you use?
Most of those pictures were taken with my cell phone. I've got an iPhone, so some of them have been taken, but also not a fancy camera. It's a cybershot that I used, and mostly my camera, my phone these days, because it's high risk to walk in the veld yourself with the expensive cameras. So, yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And I know Rupert always wants to talk to us about trespassing. You know, really, there's so many open spaces. I've recently just been in Waylands, just before Darling, and it's beautiful. And Tini Fashveld has lots to see. I saw many of the flowers you were mentioning. And so it really isn't necessary to climb a farmer's fence and risk getting into that kind of trouble. And then
Yeah,
my last
rather,
question
yes.
that I see there is for you. But finish speaking, Eugene.
Yeah, it's rather be safe than sorry.
Yeah.
And please don't jump fences. Please respect people's privacy.
It was quite lovely. I actually met John Duckett walking his own Waylands Nature Reserve. And it was the way he
Well,
came up to me and said, I hope you're enjoying the flowers. And I took a look and I said, who am I speaking to? It's no John Duckett. And then he drove off in front of us, except he didn't drive off. He kept stopping to get out his car, but it's a one-way to take photos. So we kept hopping out the car to follow him to see what was he looking at in his own felt. It was a really amazing experience. So pop into Waylands. It's beautiful at the moment, really beautiful. And he said it's still actually a bit early. And you might find John Duckett there with his camera guiding to you to all the red darter species that he has. The guy's a rhiza and he has a Spiraxis or a Rhabnulia. That's also red data. So Eugene, last question that's been asked is what pollinator or which flower's pollinator or which flower are you still trying to capture? Which is the elusive one you're still hunting for?
um, yeah, I don't have the elusive pollinator. Um, okay, I actually do. I haven't got a nice shot of the red weevil pollinating the diaceas. That's the one because they're much faster than flies.
You might need something more than a cell phone.
Yes.
Well, Eugene, thank you so much for joining us. It's been absolutely fabulous and all the trouble and effort it takes to put a presentation together. And then I still limited your time. But I love the fact that you've said, get out and look between the daisies. And having just driven through the wildflowers twice, there have been sections of the road where I'm like, I've seen everything. And then I've stopped for something particular. And then I've just noticed so much more at my feet. So if I could also encourage people to stop as often as possible whenever you see a really full patch of flowers, because it's quite astonishing what you see between the daisies. So thank you, Eugene. It's been a pleasure having you. Please stay on if you'd like to.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Then I am going to just introduce Jason Sampson. But first, I just wanted to say that the whole idea of the two spring webinars is to crisscross the country. So we've done Eugene at the West Coast, which of course at this time of year sings so loudly for all our South African hearts with these carpets of daisies. But that's not to say that there isn't some spectacular spring flowers to be seen in the Highveld, along the East Coast, or even inland. So next month, we'll be having an East Coast speaker, Namama May from Kolefe Garden, and we'll be having Ndomiso Majiga from Bloemfontein Botanical Garden, sharing their plant passions and flowers that they are enjoying and events in the area. So Jason is the curator of the Mani van Escape Botanical Garden in the Plant and Sciences Department. His foraging garden and the future African campus, my apologies, was his brainchild as an important part of the living plant collections at the University of Pretoria. He holds a BSc degree and honors degrees, but really I met Jason over aloes. He is passionate. I'm hoping it's going to be more than aloes tonight, just to tease him. But I met him in the Mani van Escape garden, walking along this long row of a variety of aloes that made me look twice. It's not a great time to mention, not all that fond of succulents. So they have to be spectacular to win me over. And Jason's were. So Jason, welcome. Over to you. I'm looking forward to what you're going to share in the hard vault. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I have the distinct privilege of working in Pretoria. I grew up in Gauteng, and I've spent all of my professional life working in the bushveld and in the grasslands of the interior of South Africa. I curate the University of Pretoria's botanical collections, and I spend a lot of time in the veld, although less than I would prefer. My part of the world is very special. It's a transition zone between the Bankenveld and the bushveld, and it's a landscape that has been formed by exciting events over about the last 3 billion years. Normally, people think of winter and early spring in the Highveld as being a bit drab. It is nothing of the sort. The photograph is of myself standing on the Magaliesberg Ridge. It's the Daspoort Ridge to my left, and Norad Koppies Bushveld in the distance to my right. The companion sitting on my shoulder is named Jewel. Jewel enjoys walks in the veld on my shoulder. Jewel is a black-winged jardine and one of my companion birds. Pictured in the photograph are two plants that form a very important component of the crest of the Magaliesberg, and that is on your left, a xerophyta species, Xerophyta retinervis, specifically, also known as a black stick lily. These plants occur on very shallow soils and rock pavement communities. They're resurrection plants, which means they can dry out and look dead and burn and be growing again within 24 to 48 hours of receiving water in summer. They are fascinating plants, very difficult to grow in cultivation. And to your right, Alopeglerae, which is restricted to the crest and the northern faces of the highest parts of the Magaliesberg, and one or two smaller populations to the south, always in high places, always facing north. It occurs in similar conditions to the xerophyta, but it is an extreme succulent. It doesn't have strange adaptations to dry out. It just survives by storing water. And it is actually in flower at this time of the year. We have a diverse aloe flora, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later. But the peak of our aloe season is past, but we have a number of spring flowering aloes, and they generally flower to set seed just before the rains. Our rainy season will be starting in October. Pictured is a section of the Witwatersrand. So the Bankenveld, it comes from an old Dutch word meaning desk veld or ridge veld. So it's defined by these open spaces covered in grasslands with quartzite, generally quartzite ridges, although dolomite ridges also occur. Generally marching sort of east-west. And that gives you an entire mosaic of different microclimates, soils, aspects. There are caves in certain areas. There are some very different soils formed by quartzite, formed by dolomites. I know of huge patches of ironstone and hematite, and that often defines the flora. Kalkievel, for instance, has got a specific flora known only as the silver flora, because for some reason a large proportion of the plants have got glaucous leaves. It's a small patch just to the south of Hartbeespoort, on a kalkhevel, a limestone hill, or rather a dolomite hill. The cradle of humankind is also in the Bankenveld. There's a very old dolomites and 3 million-year-old caves. So this is a picture of my childhood. This is where I grew up. I used to spend my life in the veld. And I grew up just outside the cradle of humankind. So, if you're talking about late winter and early spring flowers in the Bankenveld, you talk about a few different groups of plants. My favorite are always the plants that one will find after fires, or the plants that have completed their life cycle just before winter had set in, and will be starting their life cycle with the rains. So top left is Solbachia cutiloba, a very common resident in the grasslands of South Africa. They can have either sweet-smelling flowers or extremely vile-smelling flowers, and you'll only know if you smell them. Bottom left, Hypoxis African potato, very famous plant. Many different species, all generally have yellow flowers, and you'll often find them flowering very heavily after fires, which are, of course, a defining characteristic of grasslands. The fires keep trees out and biodiversity high in the grasslands. Next, going anti-clockwise, is a marama bean, Tylosema. It's related to Bauhinia, but it is part of the underground flora, or underground Saffrotex. These will be flowering soon. They won't be necessarily in flower yet, but they are sprouting after the fires. Next one on is Cucumis metuliferus. If you run into these in the veld, they are bright orange by this time of year. They are getting ready to rot just before the rains. They will then sprout and fruit again in the summer, and then leave these persistent fruit over winter. This is a cucumber relative, and the fruit is actually farmed in places like New Zealand under the name of kawana melon. I prefer them green. You cut the thorns off, you slice them up, and they taste just like a sour cucumber. Fantastic wild fruit. Bottom right is a dicoma. The flowers will be shedding their seeds also just before the rains. The plants will probably be almost completely dried out and ready to be burned. The Eulophia orchid in the middle of the photo, and then I don't have such an interest in insects as our previous host, but if you find colorful looking denizens of the veld, they are always, it's always interesting to see what they're busy with. A large part of our spring and early summer display on the Highveld is formed by Erythrina lysistemon. Pictured is the normal red flowered form and a pink mutation. I have about 9 different flower color mutations in the botanical collections at the university. It's something that I was briefly interested in. It's nice because erythrinas grow very easily from truncheons, so you can propagate these strange mutations quite easily. What is interesting with these flower colored mutations of erythrina is the seed tends to be the same color as the flower. So everybody knows erythrina seeds are red, but in a pink flowered erythrina, the seeds are pink. I've got a yellow flowered erythrinas and the seed look like maize. So it's obviously the same genes are being co-opted for flower color as are being used for seed color. To your left is part of the underground forest that some people describe as being an integral part of the grasslands of South Africa. That is Erythrina zyra, ploegbreker. They will only start flowering in October, so I'm breaking the rules a little bit. But this is essentially a tree that's been driven underground by frost and drought. The Saffrotex can weigh up to a ton or so. I've seen people try to dig them out before and relocate them. The Afrikaans common name is ploegbreker because if you run into one of these with a plow, that's the end of the plow. completely invisible in winter unless you see the dried leaves and the seeds, but the above ground parts normally burn off in the fires. Then, of course, your lilies, a very loose group, but Scodoxus puniceus you find in forested cliffs and ravines and cave mouths. They are in full bloom right now. Pictured is the normal red flowered form, and then var alba, which is a white mutation in the Botanical Gardens collection. Of course, crinums, Crinum macauani, Crinum bulbispermum, very prominent along river courses and wet areas. Crinum, there are some crinum species also from the drier areas and in grasslands. Nephofia ruperi, we have 3 or 4 species of Nephofia ruperi will be flowering now in early spring. Gloriosa superba, although that's the wrong form of the species for this presentation. Normally the Gloriosas I run into the veld are yellow, purely yellow. And of course, Xerophyta in flower again. Those Xerophyta pictures were taken just outside of Cullinan after a big burn and an early rain, and the hillside was every shade of white through to that lovely dark purplish shade. As Cherise mentioned, one of my first and greatest loves is aloes. We've come out of a very, very busy aloe season, but in Gauteng, aloes that one might still see in flower, aloe mutabilis, top right. Some people consider this a form of aloe arborescens. It's a cremnophytic plant, tends to grow on the southern faces, in the Magaliesberg scarp faces, and cliff faces throughout Gauteng. Its distinctive color, mutabilis, meaning changeable, turns red to yellow. Some of your later flowering forms are still in flower now. Aloe malathi, of course, we know aloe malathi. These are Gauteng former aloe malathi flowering on Hatfield main campus. Those subsequent flower racemes are meant to attract sunbirds. Sunbirds like to perch on the flowers that they feed on. So we're just making our pollinators welcome. Of course, a lot of aloe species are in seed right now, and the seed will be ripening in October and in November, just in time for the rain. Aloe peglerae coming into bloom. Aloe castania, the chestnut aloe, that would be the brown flowered cattail sort of aloe to the right of the aloe peglerae. And of course, there are stapeliads that one finds in many of the same habitats. That is Stapelia leondertzi, a very smelly clone that I have. Of course, it's a carrion flower, and it attracts flies as a pollinator. That particular plant is in a pot and it gets moved around depending on whether it's flowering or not. Of course, the habitats are starting to green up, water being a bit of a limiting factor at this time of year. But of course, our wetlands are bright green as they green up as soon as the temperatures start warming up. The top is Nymphia nuchali varcerulia. The pictured wetland environment is the Hotbeer Spruit in Hatfield. It's a rehabilitation project on a section of river that flows through our sports campus. Ginger lilies, polygalas, and myself with a couple of friends. Said friends tend to start arriving at about this time of year, and as soon as they warm up, reptiles are very good at regulating their own body temperature. So even large lizards like this rock monitor are very active this time of year, coming out of brumation, looking for food. And of course, our trees, our bushveld trees, and trees are very much a part of the Highveld. Sometimes in protected areas, and sometimes sometimes planted. And sometimes in places where fire has been excluded and they start actually becoming a canopy that transforms that section of grassland. So top left is the bride of the bushveld, the Didropia, Dombeia rotundifolia. They are coming into full spectacular bloom on the rocky high areas around Pretoria at the moment. The whole tree turns ice white. So unfortunately, it's a very short display. It only lasts a couple of weeks, and then the flowers turn brown before the leaves. Might have something to do with the common name of the Drolpier. Bottom left is me cheating a little bit. Pink flowered Dombea rotundifolia are common in certain areas of the northern bushveld. That picture was taken around Nelspruit. That's one of the pinkest ones I've ever seen. Middle is one of the Ochna species, Lekkerbrek or Kolbach plain. Bottom is tree fuchsia, that has an edible fruit as well. Very popular with birds. Bottom right is something that you actually find growing in very disturbed areas, very sandy areas, Dodonia, sand olive. Sometimes one finds trees with very reddish seeds, very showy. And top right is a Buddleia species. I was looking for a good photo Buddleia salvifolia, but that is one of the other species. But Buddleia salvifolia will be in full bloom very soon, and is in full bloom in some areas already. And yeah, so as Charisse mentioned, I do a lot of work with aloes. So my last slide is not the felt, and it's not the beautiful things you can see in the felt. It's just a few photos that I took in the botanical garden this year and in years previous. And so just to give you an idea of what my midwinter actually looks like is bottom right. Thank you very much.
Jason, thank you so much for that. That last picture is absolutely spectacular. I remember walking that with you and just being blown away by the display that aloes can provide. And I've recently heard as well on a pollinator list of what feeds well that aloes rank one of the highest for the nutritional value of their nectar and how many pollinators they feed. There was another reason for me to just pay them some respect, even though they're possibly not my favorite at first choice. I thought, wow, I didn't even realize there was a pollinator list ranking plants as to how well they can feed things. And kudos to aloes for doing that. You're just showing off with that last picture. It's absolutely brilliant. So I have two questions that have come through. How long will an aloe take from seed to being sown by seed and germinating to be ready to be planted out in the garden? Is the growth rate of an average garden aloe? How long does someone have to wait?
You know, it's a relatively broad question, but normally aloes that do well in gardens are ready for planting out in gardens in about 2 to 3 years from seed.
And then the rest of the question was, and then till flowering?
Okay. Also, once again, a slightly unfair question. Smaller aloes flower faster. Something like aloe molothi, you'll wait a good 5 to 7 years to see a first flower. Whereas something that is smaller, 3 to 4 years. Hybrid aloes tend to flower faster than species aloes, and also you do get like your habitat endemics. So, for instance, aloe peglerae, which I spoke about in the talk, that grows in what can only be described as extremely high silica sand with virtually no organic matter.
And
So, if
why
you
is
want to
that?
grow,
Sorry,
because
why is that?
the top of the Michalisberg is recrystallized quartzite. So it actually weathers into pool filter sand. And that's what a lot of people use in their pool filters. It's quarried from areas in the Michalisberg. Old quarries, the Michalisberg is a biosphere reserve, but there are historical quarries that still quarry that material. So if you want to grow aloe peglerae, well, you have to grow it in pool filter sand in a terracotta pot in the north face of your house, and try not to let it get too wet in winter, and it'll flower every year for you. But if you were to plant it in your garden, it'll probably survive, but it'll never flower.
Well, I thought aloes were easy. I thought you just, what's that thing about succulents? You just break it off and stick it in and it'll be fine. Now look at you making it all difficult for us and challenging us. I like
South
it.
African flora, there's always an exception.
That is true. That is true. And also for the viewers, Jason kept referring to the rules. So I'm a tough cookie in some ways. And I made up a whole lot of rules that Eugene and Jason had to follow. First of all, they had to show what was in flower now in their area, because I wanted you to be able to drive out or walk in the veld and actually see what they'd been speaking about. And the next rule was that they had to make sure that at least 70% of the plants they spoke about were available in your local nursery or online to buy seed. And the last unfair rule was to say that the majority of the plants would need to be, you would be able to grow them. Because quite often wonderful shows and displays and presentations on plants on things that you would never be able to get hold of or grow. And it's incredibly frustrating. So he was breaking the rules a few times, but it's still to come. So it's fine. It's not like you've missed it. It's in the future. Thank you so much, Jason, for your time. I really appreciate it. I've loved the display from the Highveld, and I look forward to, because I actually originally asked you to show me what would be between the daisies, so between the grasses in the grasslands. And of course, as a summer rainfall guy, you put me right and said the grasslands are still dry and nasty. So I might ask you sometime in the future to show us a grassland talk if you're up for it. I did have one question from myself, and that is, you showed a picture of Polygula, but I thought Polygulas were only winter rainfall species. Are there summer rainfall species of Polygula?
Yeah, there are a couple of quite widely distributed Polygula. So there was Polygula virgata, which is the broom Polygula. They tend it is summer growing, tends to seed itself all over the place, and I think it actually has a range that extends north of South Africa.
I had no idea. I've claimed that as a winter rainfall species. So lovely when I learn something.
Look, there's a couple of genuses that are huge in the winter rainfall, and we only get a couple of them up in the summer rainfall. But I mean, Protea would be a great example.
Yeah.
We've only got 3 or 4 Protea species that I know of in the Highveld. And I mean, how many do you have?
Well, I don't want to brag.
Lots.
I'll give you your succulents and we'll keep our Proteas.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much. So everybody, what I've done is I've prepared what's on in and around the country as far as I could find. I'm just going to share my screen and go through a whole lot of events that you would be able to find in your area. Just to make it work.
It's perfect, Purix.
Okay, can I get to the next slide though?
Just see this, just to the right at the bottom. Yeah, there you are.
Thank you so much. All right, so the first is in Durban Botanical Gardens. They have a plant fair. Also, don't worry if you're not able to fast enough or capture the details quick enough. We will be sharing this as a PDF, and then you'll be able to see all the details that you couldn't quick enoughly, English, you couldn't capture quick enough. But they're going to have an Indigenous plant fair in Durban Botanical Gardens in September, so diarize that. The Botanical Gardens plant fairs are always great because you get things you generally can't get hold of. And I'm cheating a little and showing an October date for the Kirstenbosch Plant Fair. That's building back biodiversity in the garden. So Kirstenbosch has always had their plant fair in autumn, but they're now going to be having one in spring. So you can diarize that. The Lowveld branch was great. Frank Webb shared a whole lot of activities that are going on there. Sunday the 15th of October and Sunday the 17th. Lovely things that the Botanical Society members of that branch get to do. I'm busy hunting for plants of Pavetta cooperi, so it immediately caught my eye. And then parks, the national parks are open for free 16 to 24 September. What a joy to be able to go in without having to pay and enjoy our natural heritage all over the country. So remember to plan to make use of that. And then, as Eugene mentioned, there's the Clan William Wildflower Festival, although I didn't want to focus too much on the West Coast, quite honestly, with this annual event of flowering. What's spectacular this year is with the rains and the temperature, is you're getting bulbs, succulents, and the daisies in flower all at once. And they generally overlap, but in really, really good years, you get them all three blooming spectacularly together. And the veld is like that at the moment. It doesn't always happen. So if you could drive out anytime during the week, it's quieter, but even on the weekends. And the Darling and the Clan William shows are really incredible because they go collect it all for you and they put it on display. So you could go to one church venue or the town hall and they have everything there. And best of all, it's usually labeled along with milk tart and cook sisters and local cuisine. And this was quite interesting. The Darling Wildflower Show wanted volunteers, which is wonderful, to go help pick and arrange and display. And Sue can be contacted if you would like to go put that show together. And the Karlitsdorp Vetplanfeest is going to be happening soon. So that's something you can diarize as well for all those succulent lovers that I've offended this evening. There, I've made it up to you. Huntum National Botanical Garden is full of flowers at the moment. Please go support that botanical garden. And the Cape Horticultural Society, less botanical now, or it'll be a mix of indigenous and exotics. They're having their annual fundraising sale. That'll be happening on the 9th of December in Constantia. It's always a wonderful selection of plants grown by the Horticultural Society, so that you can contend to. The Fynbos Life Fair, Caitlin is very set on endemic local sandplain fynbos that's threatened and not just grows locally. That's where the city of Cape Town was built, is on this vegetation type, and she is doing a lot to protect it and promote it. So again, you'll find really unusual plants at this fair. Boerland Vetplanfeest, hosted by Living Desert Plants. They have really unusual succulents you can't generally get hold of in the nurseries. That's always well worth it. There is so much to do. And then I found something on Shotthole Borer. It's gone quiet, but you all need to be paying attention to what's happening around Shotthole Borer. And Francois Roots had an amazing talk that I attended, giving the story of the fungus, not just the beetles. I highly recommend joining the Pathology Society, all about plant pathology. So interesting, all the things that viruses, bacteria, and fungi that we don't usually look for. We're so busy looking at the pests that we can see. We forget there's a whole world going on with plants that is unseen to our eye. We only ever see the symptoms. And so it could be very interesting for you to join this society or ask to attend his talk in particular as a visitor. Quite out of interest, any wildflower photography, it has a really good charity that it's supporting. It's local. I thought I would give this show a mention. And then back to KwaZulu-Natal. They are having a wonderful Clivier show and sale. Amazing colors and varieties and breeding going there. And then I am hosting a propagation workshop this Saturday at the Flower Cafe, propagating Streptocarpus, which are indigenous to South Africa, made famous by Dibleys in Wales and at the Chelsea Flower Show, but they really are our plants to be celebrated as well. And the fun thing about them is they're done by leaf cuttings. So if you would like to join me, you can book through the Flower Cafe, and I'll see you this Saturday. And then a wonderful celebration is with the Woordefeest that's going to be happening in Stellenbosch. Stellenbosch Botanical Gardens is now going to have its first rare and collectible plant market, and they'll be hosting a whole lot of events and workshops as well. So that is definitely one to attend. Something new and exciting, something different, and another little botanical garden that's absolutely exquisite and well worth a visit if you've never been. And that is it from me. Are there any questions from anybody? Let me just check. All right. Well, everyone, with 3 minutes to spare, if I have done the job well, just looking for the Q&A section. There we go. Thank you for joining me in my first Botanical Society webinar, where we are learning to know, grow, enjoy, as well as protect our Indigenous flora. I look forward to seeing you. Oh, Mary, yes, a question. What would you like to ask, Mary? Will there be a replay? That can't be Mary's question. Madeleine, are you able to help me?
Yes, we are going to upload it on the YouTube channel of Potsock, and we've recorded it.
Thank you. And Mary van Blomenstein raised a hand. Are you able to see what she would like to ask?
She must just put something in the chat. I don't know if she wants to talk. I think it's perhaps an accidental hand.
All right, Mary, if you still have a question, just click on the chat link at the bottom of the Zoom and you can type out a question from us.
There is a question now. She's asking, when is the Stellenbosch garden event?
Stellenbosch garden event? Well, that event is in October. We can go back and have a look at it, but we will be sharing the PowerPoint. I'm just able to go back if you want to see. 14th to 15th of October is that particular rare and collectible plant market. The Woordefees, I think, is for the entire week. So there it is.
So both the PowerPoints are now in the chat. I'll keep the room a little bit open, but we can also put it, when we distribute, we'll add it in.
You'll be getting the information, all of you who participated, you're welcome to share it. My PowerPoint of all the events around Cape Town and across the rest of the country. And thank you so much. I'll hang around just a little bit, but if you are ready to leave, that's absolutely fine.